They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea. From the deserts of Africa to the forests of Gaul, from Spain's silver mines to Egypt's grain, Rome had devoured the known world. Each victory filled the empire's veins with gold. Coins stamped with emperors' faces glittered in markets from Judea to Britannia. A single denarius could cross 3 continents and still be trusted. Rome didn't invent money, but it turned wealth into a religion. Triumphal processions thundered through marble streets. Generals tossed gold coins into the crowds as symbols of divine favor. The empire grew rich, not through trade, but through conquest. Every province conquered was a new vein to mine. Egypt's grain fed the legions. Spain's silver paid their wages. Gaul's taxes built their roads, and Africa's slaves tilled their fields. The empire's wealth was so vast that it seemed eternal. Temples were gilded, statues plated with gold leaf. Even the gods of Rome were dressed in luxury. But gold, like empire, is addictive. The more Rome had, the more it needed. Soon, treasure was not flowing into Rome fast enough. The mines of conquered lands began to run dry, tributes grew smaller, wars became costlier. And an empire built on plunder began to realize it could not conquer forever. So the Romans turned their eyes inward, not to the world they had conquered, but to their own people. Tax collectors squeezed provinces dry, merchants bribed officials for favors, senators grew richer than kings, and for the first time gold began flowing out of the empire, into the hands of the East. But Rome refused to see the signs. Its palaces still shone, its markets still bustled, the illusion of wealth endured. And like all addicts, Rome mistook abundance for strength. The empire's appetite had no rival, but its victories were running out. Each new frontier offered less gold, fewer slaves, and more resistance. Rome was growing, but its treasure chests were shrinking. In the Senate, whispers began. The provinces cost more than they yield. But no emperor could speak of restraint, because restraint to Rome was weakness. So they invented new ways to feed the empire's hunger: taxes on merchants, tariffs on ships, tributes on temples, and fines on those who could not pay. The merchants who once traded in gold and spice now traded in bribes and favors. The Senate became a marketplace, and the empire a business. The old virtues of Rome, discipline, modesty, duty, were replaced by a new religion, luxury. In the villas of the elite, gold became a drug. Tables were carved from ivory, fountains flowed with imported wine, feasts lasted 3 days, while the streets outside filled with beggars. Coins once used to pay soldiers now vanished into the hands of silk merchants from the East. Rome, the master of the world, was bleeding wealth to nations it called barbaric. Gold was flowing out faster than it came in. To keep up, emperors began melting down statues, stripping temples of ornaments, and even recycling funeral masks. Still, it was never enough. The empire's armies demanded pay, the games demanded spectacle, the citizens demanded bread, and the emperors gave it all, fearing revolt more than bankruptcy. Then came the decision that would haunt Rome forever. When gold ran short, they found a way to make more. Not by mining, not by trade, but by deception. Under Emperor Nero, the purity of the denarius was quietly reduced. Coins still gleamed, but inside, they were half copper. The empire began to counterfeit itself. At first, no one noticed. A denarius was a denarius, but merchants soon realized that a coin from Nero's mint weighed less than one from Augustus. Confidence, that invisible foundation of all money, began to crack. Prices rose. Trust fell, and the empire, for the first time, felt the tremor of economic panic. But instead of reform, Rome doubled down. Each new emperor debased the coin a little more, until a denarius, once nearly pure silver, was worth barely a whisper of its name. Merchants stopped accepting imperial coins. Soldiers demanded payment in grain or foreign currency. Trade slowed to a crawl. And in a cruel twist of fate, Rome's obsession with gold had made it worthless. But greed does not die easily. When money failed, Rome turned to what it knew best: conquest. New campaigns were launched not to defend the empire, but to refill its treasury. Legions marched east, burning cities to fund festivals. But every victory only deepened the debt. Conquest was no longer Rome's strength. It was its addiction. A coin once meant something in Rome. It was a promise, a weight of silver, a seal of trust. But by the 3rd century, that promise had been broken. The denarius had become a ghost of its former self. Its silver reduced to dust, its shine fading to copper, its face, the emperor's, now a symbol of desperation. The people of Rome could feel it long before they could name it. Prices doubled, then tripled. A loaf of bread cost more than a soldier's daily pay. Farmers stopped bringing food into the cities. Why trade grain for coins that lost value by the week? The markets of Rome, once symbols of abundance, grew silent. Merchants closed their stalls. Foreign traders refused imperial currency, and the empire's streets echoed not with the sound of gold, but with hunger. In panic, the emperors struck more coins, faster and cheaper, hoping quantity could replace quality. They even mixed bronze and tin, polishing them to gleam like silver. But the people weren't fooled. Trust, once Rome's invisible currency, was now gone. By the reign of Emperor Diocletian, the empire had split under the weight of its own economy. Civil wars were fought not for land, but for the right to print money. Each general minted his own coins, each claiming his metal was purer, his rule more divine. Rome's once unified currency became a battlefield of lies. To stop the chaos, Diocletian tried to rewrite the rules. He issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, a law to freeze the value of goods and wages across the empire. It sounded noble. It was suicide. Merchants refused to sell under forced prices. Farmers hid their crops. Markets emptied again, this time not from scarcity, but from fear of the law. Rome had reached the point where wealth no longer meant gold, but survival. Soldiers deserted for food. Families buried their coins. And statues of emperors were stripped, melted, and forged into weapons. The empire that once fed on the riches of the world was now eating itself. Yet even in collapse, Rome could not let go of its addiction. Gold, that metal of gods and emperors, remained its obsession, even as the empire itself turned to dust. Because gold was never Rome's treasure. It was its mirror. And what it reflected in the end was greed, gilded, glorious, and fatal. When the money died, so did the noise of the empire. Markets once bursting with trade fell silent. Granaries locked, ships anchored. The heartbeat of Rome, commerce, stopped. In its place came something older, simpler, and colder: barter. A sack of grain for a pair of sandals. A jug of wine for a roof to sleep under. Silver had become worthless, but a loaf of bread was priceless. The rich hoarded gold in their villas, but even they found themselves trapped in a dead economy. Their treasures could no longer buy loyalty, only envy. And so, Rome turned to a new currency: faith. As temples emptied, churches filled. The cross replaced the coin. Where once people worshipped gold, they now prayed for forgiveness. Christianity spread not through power, but through poverty. It offered something Rome could no longer mint: hope. But faith alone could not feed legions. The army shrank. Borders crumbled. Germanic tribes moved through the once mighty gates of Rome without a fight. In the year 410 AD, Alaric and his Visigoths entered Rome. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City was sacked. But they found little to steal. The gold was gone. The banks were empty. All that remained were stones and memories. Witnesses wrote that as Rome burned, its people did not cry for the emperor or the Senate. They cried for the idea of Rome itself. Because Rome was never just a place. It was a belief that wealth could buy eternity. But the truth was carved in the ashes. Eternity cannot be purchased, only earned. Yet in that silence, a new world was already forming. Peasants became lords, soldiers became kings, and the idea of Rome, its roads, its laws, its dream of order, outlived the empire that built them. For the ashes of gold still carried a spark, the desire to create, to trade, to believe again, and centuries later, that spark would ignite a new world of commerce and capital. Rome was gone, but its lesson endured. That when wealth becomes the measure of all things, it eventually measures the end of itself. And so, from ashes and ruin, the world learned to ask a different question. Not how rich is an empire, but how long can its values survive? Centuries have passed since the last Roman coin was minted. The empire's marble has crumbled, its gods forgotten, its name reduced to legend. And yet, its reflection still shimmers in the world we've built. The symbols have changed. The coins replaced by cards, the markets by screens, the temples by towers of glass and steel. But the faith is the same. We still worship wealth, still measure worth in digits and numbers, still believe, as Rome once did, that prosperity is proof of power. In our time, the coins are not forged in fire, but in code, trillions created by the press of a key, printed not on silver, but on faith. Every empire, it seems, eventually discovers the same illusion, that money can be infinite without consequence. But Rome taught us otherwise. Its gold ran out not because it disappeared, but because it stopped meaning something. When value becomes belief, and belief becomes habit, it takes only one tremor to make the world realize that the emperor's vault is empty. We have our own emperors now, banks too big to fail, nations drowning in debt, markets inflated by promises, and like Rome, we celebrate growth while fearing collapse. History doesn't repeat itself. It refines its mistakes. Rome's mistake was believing that gold was eternal. Ours may be believing that money is. But if there is one truth that survives every collapse, it is this: wealth may vanish, but wisdom, when remembered, can rebuild worlds. Because behind every coin ever struck, every bill ever printed, every number ever written, there is still something human, the desire to create, to trade, to trust. The Romans lost their gold, but their legacy became the foundation of law, architecture, and thought. Perhaps we too will lose our currencies someday. But if we remember what money was meant to represent, exchange, cooperation, value, then not all will be lost. Because the true wealth of any civilization is not the metal in its vaults, but the wisdom it leaves behind. And somewhere, under layers of dust and time, in the ruins of old Rome, lies a single coin, worn and unrecognizable, once traded for bread, now worth only its story. And that story is this: when greed becomes a nation's purpose, wealth becomes its ruin. This is the lesson of Rome, and it still speaks in the language of gold.